when the Death of Superman thing happened, you know, I think the other creators did like a tour to promote stores or to help stores because there was a hurricane in 92,
Hmm.
or was it early 93? I forget. There was a big weather event that hit, and a lot of the other creators went. I didn't because my daughter had
Hurricane
been
Andrew,
born.
probably.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And my
It's
daughter had
funny,
been
I
born.
grew up in Florida, and I was probably 4 or 5 at that time. That had a big effect on me. Like I
Yeah.
remember that.
But yeah, so my daughter had just been born, so I wasn't doing any travel. But those guys did a lot of benefits stuff for some of those stores that were affected, and but I did a lot of local signings. I mean, no one was charging for their signature, but then QVC jumped in and started paying, $5 a comic to sign something, and I it was crazy. If I wanted to, I literally could have signed 500, you know, probably 50,000 copies of any of those books. It was that much money that they were willing to spend. And I just didn't want to spend all my time signing comics either. So I turned down a lot of it. I signed some for QVC, and then I went on QVC to promote it. In I think 93, I was on QVC for like a 2-hour block. And that was kind of fun, but it was in my thinking, it was like grandmas buying comics for their grandkids, and the grandma's not going to go into a comic store or go to a comic convention to get a book signed, so she's paying a premium on TV. But it was a different market to me, so I could
Yeah.
justify it. But I never thought any of this. I mean, anybody who said, "Oh, I'm buying 5 copies so I could put my kid through college," I would just say, they're comics, they're not going to be valuable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's
They're
people
printing like a
misunderstanding.
million
Like,
of them.
yes, exactly. Like I was just gonna say, like people misunderstand. Like the things that are going to be valuable are going to be things that are rare for whatever reason, not the
Yeah,
ones that they print 10 million copies of. Those
yeah,
are
it's
by definition not valuable. Like
right.
the
You're
more
looking
they
at
print, the less valuable it is.
low print run stuff might have some juice to it, but yeah. So I mean, it's funny that there's always been that side of the market that exists with the comic store putting some book up on the wall the week it comes out and sells out for $5. I mean, I understand that, but the nice thing about where DC was at that time was that DC felt like as long as there was an interest in books, they'll go to a second printing. Marvel didn't do the second printings. Marvel wanted to see that comic book up on the wall because that was almost like that was their own advertising.
Hmm.
Don't miss out on a book because it might be $10 or $5 next week. Whereas DC was like, oh no, if there's an interest in this Superman, we're going to keep going back to print. And there were probably 6, 7 printings of all those books. It's kind of nuts. Dennis Janke drew one Superman story, one complete issue, and it was an Adventures of Superman, and it was the issue that had the fist pounding through the ground at the end. And he on his one, Superman full issue that he ever drew, he earned a great amount of money, which was good for him, but it was just kind of funny in a way, like what are the luck of the draw.
Huh.
And also Bob McLeod was part of the Superman team. Bob was part of the first Death of Superman meeting. Bob left to go back to Marvel right before that. So, I think
So he
Jackson
could
got,
have been in that, but
yeah, Jackson Geist replaced him. And, it's just good luck for Jackson
huh.
and bad timing for, Bob McLeod. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I mean,
Nobody,
who could have known? I mean,
nobody could have predicted any
yeah,
of it.
it's not, again, like you say, it's not like, okay, we've got the marketing involved in this. It's going to be a big push. Like, it's like no one had any idea.
Yeah. And the other funny thing is, and this still sticks in my brain, I just think of it as funny because in all the years that Warner Brothers has owned DC, the one buzzword that they always like to use, and you'll still hear it once in a while, it's synergy. They use that word so much with, oh, when DC is going to be integrated into Warner Brothers, it's going to be synergy. And yet it was always the opposite.
Right.
There was no emotional support from Warner Brothers. And
It's funny.
the
I was kind of thinking that before when you said like that you were pushing for these different Superman titles to be connected to each other. I
yeah,
almost jumped in to say like you're trying to get some kind of like synergistic effect there.
right.
But it's kind of funny you're saying like Warner Brothers itself was promoting that as an idea that just being in the company was going to give you that, but
Yeah,
you have to actually commit to doing it to get that.
right.
Like, you know,
Well, and I had personal experience with that earlier when I did the Batman movie book. One of the big kind of innovations that we all pushed for, and we called, Jonathan Peterson was the editor. Jonathan and I both lobbied the circulation guy at DC, Matt Ragone, to see if they could sell the books in the movie theaters. And we also tried to see if they could sell the Batman books in like Walgreens or other retailers that didn't necessarily sell comics. So we created a box, or like I guess a point of purchase stand that
huh,
would hold the books with a Batman coming out, it was kind of cool what they
like
called
a
a dump.
display.
They called it a dump. But they'd have to pay $5 per location. Like if they wanted it in Walmart or they wanted it in a grocery store or whatever, they'd have to pay $5 per location to put that, you know, box or whatever holder for the comics in these retailer places. And they, I guess, didn't want to do that. So they came up with some deal to sell them in the movie theaters. And this is where Warner Brothers synergy was supposed to come in. You would go see Batman in the theaters and you could leave with the comic book adaptation.
Hmm.
Or you could get it before you go into the theater. You go at the lobby, whatever. But so we had
It's
this
so
all
funny
planned
because
out.
it's like I think about this stuff all the time. Just today, just like why am I not? It's like there's like these
Well,
toy aisles and Walgreens, and you
yeah,
know, it's like there should be comic books there. Like,
yeah.
but
Well,
I get
in
it that it's
the last page of the comic of the Batman movie adaptation has the comic store locator number in it, and it was meant as outreach.
right.
So, so they did the display dump with the Batman, like a big Batman on top, and they had the plan for it to be in the theaters. And then a week before the movie opened, Warner Brothers said to DC, "We don't want that in the theaters on the opening weekend because it'll make the movie look bad." And we were like,
So
"You guys."
crazy.
So we missed out on sales for that when it made 40 million bucks the first weekend. We missed those sales. It was allowed to be sold in like starting the Monday after.
It's just
Um,
so
uh,
funny to think because it's like, what do you think is going to happen? It's you're gonna make money.
it's
It's
based on a comic that DC
right.
does. It's like you can't. It's going to embarrass the movie. It was just stupid. So, anyways, with
The
that
thing
in mind,
that's it's funny you say that. It's like the main concern is like a fear of just being embarrassed. Like it's
yeah.
like what do you care about being embarrassed about? Like,
And
you know?
again, it's what this comes down to is Warner Brothers had a lot of money invested in the movie. They were crapping their pants until that movie was released because
Right.
there's possibility that nobody goes to see it.
Right. I
So
mean, we look back on it now and we're like, oh, you know, Batmania and you know,
yeah,
Tim Burton, we look back on it as if it's a sure thing. But at the
yeah.
time, I completely understand. It's
But
like,
see, nothing is a sure thing, and that's what we're come back to Death of Superman. Nobody can predict these things. They kind of happen because people decide to buy something. Why is one thing popular and something else isn't? It's just there's a randomness to it. So the day that the Death of Superman came out, that whatever that Wednesday or that whole week, the news media did nothing but promote Death of Superman. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers had Malcolm X coming out, and that was like their big movie release. and Superman got all the promotional, it
Huh.
was sucking all the air out of the room. It was just hilarious to me that that was a down, like from their point of view, they felt like they were being cheated out of publicity because we were sucking all the, all the air out of the room with the death of Superman, and we had no control over it. It just happened. But
Right.
it
It's
was,
not like you made that. Yeah. It's who could they be mad at? You killed, who, how could they be mad at you? It's,
it was just funny. So, anyways, that all those things are all, they're so random in their own way. It doesn't mean that you don't work hard on stuff. It's just that we worked as hard on other stuff that didn't sell like that. And that's just the way the world is.
right. Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, it's like look, I like the death of Superman a lot. I like the reign of the Superman, and I like the return of Superman. I like that whole
Yeah.
saga. To me, is like, it's like a great trilogy. But then like I keep saying, like Superman Exile to me is like, why not that as like a
Yeah.
huge, I mean, it's like, I feel that, I don't mean this in an offensive way, obviously, but I feel that it's somewhat like, why isn't that considered one of the great like Superman classics? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's just like you're saying, it's like, who can say,
Yeah.
who can say, like, these
I mean,
things are mysterious.
the fact that people remember some of these storylines is cool, but I mean, DC didn't reprint the Exile stuff in its entirety until maybe 3 years ago. They wound up doing an omnibus. Maybe it was longer than that now, four
I mean,
years
I
ago.
had a trade paperback fairly,
But it
fairly
was the
young, but
trade. The trade took what it amounted to, and they
wasn't
cut the
everything.
page count down by
Right.
half. So it was Carlin had to keep kind of editing it down like he was editing a movie because DC trades were only like 200 pages or something like that. There
Man,
was
so now
some,
I got to get the real thing. And now I feel like, well,
yeah,
I
the
haven't even
omnibus
read it
has,
now. I feel like,
yeah, the omnibus actually has Identity Crisis and Exile together, so it's kind of cool. But they just recently, the within, I think the maybe again within the last 4 or 5 years is the first that they've reprinted the Funeral for a Friend,
hmm.
um, World Without Superman, all that stuff in total in that omnibus. That stuff hadn't been reprinted altogether ever. At the time they were just trades back in the 90s. They did, a trade of Funeral for a Friend and World Without Superman as well as Death of. But
Right. Yeah. I mean, I had that kind of stuff. And now I'm, thinking about it now, it's like reading the Superman Exile, reading the trade is, like it will allude to, um, like the gangbuster
yeah,
sort of nervous breakdown. And I could understand, even as like a kid, like I could understand from context what it's
yeah,
talking about, but obviously
yeah,
I didn't read the issues where that actually happened.
yeah,
But it's just funny. It's like, I feel like I sort of did because it's explaining to you, through context, you
yeah.
understand, but,
Well,
um,
that was the other thing though. When you do a story like that, you always had to have some sort of flashback sequence so that the reader who just bought that issue would not be totally lost. So,
right.
you
Yeah.
hammer home a lot of plot points so that it was clear what was supposed to be going on. Those are just the story mechanics of those days, especially with newsstands, because sometimes you could be a fan and you could miss something because it didn't show up at your local newsstand or your comic store didn't order more than 4 copies or whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, you did what you could to try to make sure that people had a sense of what the story was, anyways. But yeah, the omnibus that they did was originally they had solicited for the Identity Crisis storyline as its own hardcover, and I guess they didn't get enough orders, so they then resolicited a year later with combined with the Exile storyline. So at least it came out. They had never reprinted you know, that Superman Identity Crisis thing before in a collection, so that was a first. And I think it makes no sense to me, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that they never collected. It was just I guess the luck of timing, because at the time we were doing those, it wasn't a guarantee that anything would be collected. That wasn't like a big market. But then, early 2000s, everything was collected, you know.
Right. I
But
mean,
so
I
what
guess the thinking must be like, well, we're going to spend more money like collecting it than and doing this than we will actually make from it. But
yeah,
seems a little bit short-sighted when it's like, just to me, this late 80s and 90s period of Superman is like, one of the more creatively rich ones. And, but, of course, you could always say like part of that is like, this is the stuff you're reading as a kid. So to
yeah,
you, it seems that way. But I do think it's, I really do think that a lot of these books at that time, it's like you're talking about innovative stuff like that house ad that you said, where it's
yeah,
like Superman in the shadows, like, burned out. Like, it's like, this is fairly groundbreaking stuff for a character that prior to that is, not portrayed
yeah.
in a brooding or flawed way.
No, I mean, again, the point that a lot of this stuff winds up being kind of remembered at some point. It still needs to be reprinted because no one's digging back 40, 30 years for some comic book storyline. You know what I mean? They're not, if you want to have somebody else experience it, it's got to come out in some
Hmm.
sort of trade form or whatever. I'm just surprised. Like Marvel does do the masterworks, and they've been doing those. They're up to the point of Fantastic Four masterworks where I was inking Byrne,
Hmm.
which is kind of nuts to me. But and here DC still never reprinted, all the stuff that we did with the Triangle era. So um, they keep reprinting the Byrne Man of Steel, and then they end it at that point when Byrne leaves, and there's a big gap, and then suddenly there's Death of Superman being reprinted a million times. So they've never really done Panic in the Sky since they did a trade back in the 90s, but that's been out of print for a long time. It would be nice if they would do like some hefty hardcovers. I don't like omnibuses necessarily; they're too unwieldy. But
Right.
a
This is just
nice,
so big.
yeah. I mean, they're just hard to read. You have to lay them on a table, or else you
Right.
cut off the circulation in your legs if you
Right.
try to put them on your lap.
And also stuff gets lost like in the middle of it because it's
Oh
so
yeah, that's the
like
worst.
the
Yeah,
thickness
at
of it.
least I mean the older stuff that didn't have full bleed is usually not, you're not losing information. But on the newer books, anything after 90 what 4, when they started doing the full bleed, you're going to lose information in the gutter on the, especially a 1600-page book. You're
Yeah,
going to lose.
yeah, yeah. It's just the bulk of it. It's just stuff is just gonna fall in there.
I mean, I'm conscious of that when I've been conscious of that when I've drawn stuff for years. So I always think about it in terms of the collections, but I also think like if you're doing artwork and you do a full bleed page and another full bleed page next to it, are people going to try to read that all across like it's a double page spread? Is it going to just be too confusing? So I always try to put a gutter on the pages, and if I bleed a panel on one, like on the left side, the very next page, I'll make sure that there's not a bleed in that same area because I think it is distracting, you know.
Hmm.
Even on a monthly comic, it's distracting. I still find that a problem reading stuff now. I was just reading like an issue of um, Doctor Strange, I think it was, and it had two, whatever it was, it had multiple double page splashes. And then when it wasn't a double page splash, my brain was thinking it was going to be, but it was just two full bleed pages next to each other with similar coloring. And I was like, wait, they don't go across. Oh,
Yeah, no, yeah, you got to think about that. Yeah, you
but
can't be like,
that's a big thing. Being an old guy, I got to tell you, the one thing is that I feel like the key thing that somebody should teach every artist is storytelling clarity. I don't care what it is. It should look exciting, but you should be able to follow the story without the balloons. You know what I mean? And that's all about being clear. Your uh, character is doing something and you crop in too close that you don't know which character it might be talking. That's a problem. I still find that an issue, and I know I'm like probably more obsessive about that, but My example is exactly that. Like you have two characters, Batman and Bruce Wayne, or Clark Kent. Clark Kent's got glasses, so he's going to be readable. But if you have Batman, or you have two guys who have the same color hair, and you do a close up on them, unless they have a mustache or something, you're not going to know
Right.
who
Yeah.
and a lot of times the writers won't help. So the writer won't have somebody else saying, well, Bill, that's not true. So that you know that that's Bill talking. You know what I mean? That stuff still bothers me because I do think the point of storytelling is to make sure people understand where you're going and what your intent is.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, I'm writing a thing right now where, it's like I basically have to figure out what is visually going to be on each page before I'm even really, it has to, like you're saying, it has to read visually before I'm
Yeah.
even adding in any text at all, because that's what this is. It's a visual medium. So
Yeah.
the text I could change, you know what
Have
I
you
mean?
worked
Like,
have you worked plot style with anybody?
no, I don't really do that. I mean, that's why it's sort of a little bit, it's a different world to me, that sort of Marvel method. It's
Yeah.
like, it's, you know, I would feel a little uncomfortable even saying that I wrote it if I did that.
Yeah.
Like, I
Well,
kind of
here's the thing
consider it.
though. Here's the one thing and the one advantage in a comic is that if you write, like when I was doing Superman, when I was writing it for Tom Grummett, or when I was doing Shazam with Pete Krause, I would write a plot that was like more like a short story. So it had suggested dialogue and things in it. It wasn't panel by panel. I would suggest, hey, maybe you can do this in 4 panels, 5 panels, whatever. But you'd give them just enough. And what happens is that sometimes it is frustrating, but the result is better than what you would have
Hmm,
maybe planned on your own. That's
hmm.
what I find interesting. And it doesn't take away from the fact that you wrote it. You know what I mean? If you're
Right.
giving somebody but you're giving the artist the chance to stage it. And I think
Yeah. I
sometimes
mean, there'll
sometimes
be
that
situations where I'll just say, there'll be situations where I'll say, I'm just saying, like, I'm saying what happens in each panel, but I'm
right,
just
right,
saying, like, there's 5 panels on this page, and I'm not
right,
telling them, like, okay, this one's a wide panel, this one is
right,
a nine grid style pan.
right, right.
It's, so it's a little bit like that, but it's not quite.
But what
I
I
get
guess
I Sorry.
what I'm saying is that there's an element of not having the safety net that is kind of fun.
Hmm.
I mean, that while it can be frustrating if someone misreads your plot or doesn't give you what you had in your head, in some cases it's fun because it makes you rethink it. And that's what I liked about working plot style. It wasn't that I needed to, I mean, I could still try to say, here's what I need. Can you give me space for several balloons because this is the explanation that's going in there. And
Hmm.
invariably, artists never leave you enough room to put word balloons in.
Yeah.
So the idea makes you rethink what you're doing. So it almost gives you like a second pass at your own thing. And most
Hmm.
times I found that even when somebody did not what I wanted, by rethinking it, I still was happy with what happened. It just felt collaborative, I guess.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely. I mean, it's that there's something to that it's like there's something emerging from that. It's like it's a different world that I'm in where it's like, you guys were like, you got to make a comic every month. It's
yeah,
like, it's not,
yeah, no,
you know,
there's momentum involved in that.
yeah, I mean, this is like, I have the luxury of being like, I still have pressures like that. Like, I still have to make books and have them come out, but there's not a there it doesn't have to be on a monthly basis. If it
Right. No,
was on a monthly basis, I probably would have to do,
yeah,
like, plot style, because it's just not,
yeah.
it's like, it's just not feasible. I don't think that's like I probably am more of like, not to compare myself to like a great legend like this or whatever, but I'm more of like Alan Moore style of like I'm saying everything that's happening in every
Right,
panel.
right,
Um, on the other hand, I don't want to do a whole page that's one panel,
right,
so
right.
you don't want to be, I was gonna say maniac, but Alan Moore's not
Yeah.
a maniac for the record, but
Well,
I'm
you
just
saw, did
saying.
you saw that page from JSA that I posted, didn't you?
Oh
On
no, you
I
mean
I put it up on Twitter to this morning, or no, yesterday
I may
morning.
have, yeah, I probably
It
did,
was
I
a
think.
it was a Degaton page. It was a Degaton page. It had like 3 panels, and there was so much described in Jeff Johns's script for that page. I felt kind of like I was being punished because he only had room for 1 page for me, and he gave me 3 pages worth of stuff.
Right.
And
I'm
I
looking at it
hated
now.
I hated doing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think I solved the problems, but it's so frustrating to do that. And I always think of this when, whenever people talk about, oh, uh, artists can't draw a monthly book anymore. And it's like, it's not exactly that, but it's the idea that you could draw monthly books in that plot style format because the
You can
writer,
choose what you're
yeah,
showing.
yeah, and
Like,
the writer wasn't saying do 9 panels.
right,
You know what I mean?
right.
There were a lot of artists who could take, say, like Marv Wolfman was known for, and Roy was the same way. They would write such dense plots, and a lot of it was just extraneous stuff.
Hmm.
But I would always try to get everything that they put in there, and I'd wind up with a 9 panel page. And I remember saying that to Roy at one point. He said, "Oh, I just do that because usually people drop stuff. So, I just put it all in there and hope I get, some of it." And I was like,
That's a
well,
little bit of how I feel. Like I sometimes put this in the script. Sometimes I'll say in an email, like, I will often ask for a lot, knowing like, don't do everything I said.
yeah,
Like, do what you think works. And if you don't do everything I said, like, I'm not going to have a problem with that. Like, I want you to
yeah,
do. So I kind of, now that we're talking about it, I kind of am doing this a little bit in the sense of like, I know you're going to do what you as the artist know will work on the page. And
right,
if I asked, like, I could make mistakes where I say, okay, this guy is walking across the room. He's taking something out of his pocket. He also tripped. He also did that. Okay, you can't show 5
right,
actions in a single
right.
thing. So I know that, it's do what you think
Yeah,
works on the page.
yeah, because like that
And
that sequence probably isn't worth doing 4 panels of either.
right,
So
right,
you're
right,
just
right.
saying like pick one of the actions that maybe gets across whatever the main thing is. But here's the one that kills me, and this is I feel like it's a disease of full script, is that a writer will, and this has happened with people that you would consider famous writers that I work with. And I'm not going to say Alan Moore because it wasn't Alan Moore, but it was other people will write a thing and say they'll have a description of these, whatever, say panel one, characters talk, and there's 4 balloons in there, right? And then panel two, characters talk, and there's 4 or 5 balloons, maybe interconnecting balloons. Panel three, it'll say, this is going to be the big panel, and it only have 1 balloon in it. Panel four, it'll be another one with like a ton of dialogue. Now, when I'm drawing that, I know I need to leave space for each of these because it's not being lettered on the boards anymore, so you can't judge, right? I just know that I have to leave dead space for 3 balloons. That dictates that that panel he thinks is going to be the big panel can't be a big panel because there's not enough real estate to
Right.
fill
It's going to be covered with white balloons filled with text.
you need to use the bigger panels to accommodate a lot of dialogue, and a lot of writers don't get that, and that's a problem of, I think, going from a page to a visual, is that a lot of people can't see the visual, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Or if
I'm very sensitive about this exact issue where it's like, um, I don't know if you have read like a lot of like Mobius at all, but
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah,
he did this book. I guess he does. I guess technically this isn't even considered Mobius. This is considered more of like a Jean Girard book, but like on the Blueberry book,
oh yeah,
um, I ordered a copy of that, and the art is great, but it's like every page is filled with text,
yeah, yeah,
and it's like I don't, you know, I'm a writer, and I don't want that. Like it's like
yeah,
I'm not gonna read it. Like I'm sorry, like
yeah.
I'm not buying it for that. Like
Well,
and
his
yeah,
science fiction stuff is much lighter dialogue
right,
wise.
because then that's him. You
Yeah,
know, I got a couple copies of Hermetic
yeah,
Garage and or Airtight Garage,
yeah, yeah,
and it's like that's him just completely doing it himself, and like that's what you want, where it's like
yeah,
it's not that you don't have any words, it's that you've got to know when to use them, and just like you're saying, like it's taking up a massive amount of real estate.
yeah,
um it's interesting, like something I've thought about is, on the other hand, the words, I think if you have a comic and there's, let's say you have a comic and there's no words in it at all, I think you could go through that comic like pretty fast. Like you might
yeah,
flip through it in like, you know, 5 minutes. The
yeah,
words, I think, can control the flow of time a little bit
yeah,
because you're forced to slow down to read that. Now, these 2 pages that have a lot of words on it now have, it's taken you 5 minutes to read these 2 pages.
right.
Whereas if the whole book had 0 words in it, you might read the whole book in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
you know?
But then, but that's the idea. It's still going to be the balance between the dialogue and the art. It's
Right.
always that way, and that's
Yeah.
always an issue too. Is there's an aesthetic when you look at a page, if it has a lot of word balloons on every panel, it is like you said, it's almost fatiguing to look
Yeah.
at
It's
it.
like daunting.
Yeah,
It's like,
and
oh
there's
God, now it's like, okay, now
that's
I'm
where it's
good.
not. You need a page needs to breathe, meaning
Yeah.
you need something that you just go, oh, what a cool visual, or something. If you're setting a scene, that also kills me. And again, it happens. It happened more in the '80s, and I'd say than now. But where you would do some, do some establishing shot, and then the writer would cover up most of it with dialogue balloons or captions describing how grand the scene was or something. And it's like that was a Stan Lee thing. I mean, Stan was great for doing that.
Yeah, the
It's like
scene,
let,
the establishing shot is the establishing shot. You don't need
but
to tell me what I'm looking at.
he would junk it up with like how beautiful it was and it was stunning that people whatever, and you just read this and think,
Right.
well, just put you know the city at night and then get
Right.
into
Yeah.
the
I mean,
story.
it's funny. I'm looking a lot at the Dark Knight Returns now,
Mhm.
and he has a lot, like he has a lot of words per page, but he knows when to be like just exactly like you're talking about. I'm flipping through it as I'm talking to you. He'll have an establishing shot, and it's just a shot of it's just a shot of Gotham,
Yeah,
and he knows not to be like for instance, there's a large panel here where it's like Bruce Wayne just walking through the street, and he does have a vertical stretch of like text, but it's not
yeah,
on the image. You know,
right, right,
it's not word balloons floating on the image in
yeah,
several boxes. It's separated from, and here's an establishing shot here where again it's like the text is not describing this like almost
yeah,
half page of Gotham.
yeah. But he wrote
It's
it. I mean, he wrote and drew it. So
right, exactly.
he
He's thinking
he.
about
But
this in tandem.
yeah, but Frank also has a good. I mean, he always had a good visual sense for the panels. You
He's
know.
letting it like
Yeah.
he's like has a big half page shot here of Gotham, and it like
Right.
it breathes. It's
Yeah,
not
and that's
like
what you need. I mean, that's again, that's a part of like if you look at something like Watchmen, Watchmen is I think purposely claustrophobic. I mean, I think
with like the
it's
nine
meant
grids.
yeah, it's meant to be like that. And then when you do get a big panel, you kind of go, "Whoa," you know? Um,
He'll also just be like, I happen to have both of these books on my desk right now because I'm working on something, and it's he'll, you know, in Watchmen he'll be like, okay, the first several pages very heavy with text, But then
Yeah.
he'll be like a full page here where it's a 9 grid panel, 9 grid, 9 panels on a page, and there's zero text on the whole
Yeah.
page. So he know, it's you
And I
got to
guarantee you,
know.
his
Sorry,
script for that 9 panels was
it
probably
probably was
like
10 pages long.
5 pages of typescript,
Yeah, yeah,
typed
yeah.
out.
I'm
When I
the more reasonable version of that, where
well
I'm
here
not going to do that much.
when I when I worked with on Tom Strong, I had this
Oh, I
sense
didn't even
of
realize you did that. I guess that,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I did a bunch of stuff with Alan on the Tom Strong stuff, but the fun part was, and I described this is like if Alan Moore described a 9 panel page for you, it was like you felt like it was your goal was to try to get all of the stuff that he described in there.
Hmm.
And you couldn't get everything in there, but you could do your best. But it was like homework where you felt very satisfied when you completed it. It was hard work. And I had this fun because I used to have more contact with Dave Gibbons in the back in the old days, but Dave was we were always pretty chummy and stuff. But he, I think I did an issue, something with Tom Strong, and Dave had emailed me and he said, "Hey, good job." And I emailed him back about one of the panel descriptions, and he just had this story that just cracked me up. He said that Alan had written this thing, and I think it was in Watchmen or something, where he described everything down to the motes of dust in the sunbeam streaming through the window with motes of dust. And Dave says, "I drew it all." He said the motes, of course, were implied. And it was like, okay, so you got to know when to pull back. you
Yeah.
know, you're not going to be able to describe every bit of it.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I kind of have an approach somewhat like that. That's like with these scripts that I do, I kind of consider it a little bit like I'm writing a letter to the artist,
yeah,
and it's to inspire the artist to do their best work. And I'm not, excuse me, I don't know what Alan, is like. I don't know if he is frustrated if he doesn't see everything that he put in the script represented on
yeah,
the page. I have no idea, but like for me, it's like I'm trying to get like your juices
yeah,
flowing,
yeah,
and like I know not everything is going to be there, and
yeah.
uh
Well, here's the thing. What there, if you kind of go into it thinking you're going to try to over describe something or whatever, um, you could try to just like, what if you looked at it and said, okay, what don't I need, and just cross it off.
No,
You
yeah,
know,
I mean, I
I
do
think
that too.
I
I
think
mean, I don't want to be, again, I'm not calling Alan Moore maniac, but like,
yeah,
I don't want to be like, I don't want to be saying stuff that like you're obviously not going to draw,
yeah,
but I do want to put in like, you know, I'll try to put in things that I think are,
yeah,
almost artful or like poetic
yeah.
ways of saying. It's almost
Well,
like a
you're doing
sorry.
it as you're trying to inspire the artist, which I
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
get,
yeah. I'm
and I
trying.
think
I'll
that's
put in stuff to
valid.
be like, I want to make you feel a certain
Yeah,
way, so
yeah,
that when you're drawing it, it's like there's a depth of feeling there that and
yeah,
also I think there's an element that an artist. I mean, I'm talking a little bit out of turn because like I'm not an artist, but I think there's an element that an artist wants to feel like their writer knows what they're doing, and
yeah.
like is carrying that you're in safe hands, that
Right, right,
I have a plan, and
right.
like you could have confidence in that, and that
Yeah,
I know what I'm doing, and I'm saying this. I think that an artist wants to feel this way, that like you don't want to feel like there's a guy flying the plane who just got out of flight school yesterday,
right, right.
like
Well, like I would say though, like with of all the people I've ever worked with, I think Alan was the best visual writer. he's got an amazing, I mean, I don't know what he's like personally, other than I've met him a couple of times, but I mean, he has this ability to describe detail that makes me think that he has a really good visualization in his brain of what
Hmm.
something looks like. And it's kind of impressive because I worked with him on Tom Strong. I think an early issue, I did like an 8-page story. And then a while later, I did a 3-part story that was like an Elseworlds almost within the Tom Strong universe. And I
Huh.
was really amazed at how much that he either had built into the original story that he could then play off of, that it made me wonder if he'd already planned that, when he first did it, because it's like a retelling of the origin from a slightly different point of view with a different character becoming Tom Strong. And it was fascinating to not know that, but to feel like it was described so specifically that, I mean, most comics, if you're doing a continued series, is that you play with what somebody did before, even if it was something you did before.
Right. Like he
You
didn't
do that
have
a
that.
lot.
It's
So he did something in issue 1 in the origin, and then by issue whatever I did 15 or something, he retells the origin in like a fractured way, an Elseworlds way. And there's so many elements in there that make perfect sense that it made me think that he might have had that idea when he did issue 1.
hmm.
It's kind of crazy, but a lot of comic writing is like that. There's a little bit of a automatic writing thing that goes on,
Hmm.
that is maybe part of its momentum, and part of it is just having been immersed in comic books for so many years. But when I would start to write a plot, I would have an idea of what I was going to try to do, and I would start typing, and then it would take me somewhere different as I was going along,
Hmm.
and it would usually be better than what I thought, which is just always kind of fascinating. I mean, when
Hmm.
people say, "Oh, it wrote itself," it doesn't, but the process itself, when you sit down and start typing
Right.
page 1, by the time you get to page 7,
It's like
stuff
things emerge,
it takes
you
a
know,
turn that
like
you did not plan, or that you did not, and I find that really kind of crazy and amazing at the same time.
yeah.
And
I mean,
it
it's
happens
yeah, it's
regularly, though. I mean, it is a regular thing. It's just always amusing to me that it does feel like it's coming from somewhere else, even though it's not. I mean, it's still coming from your brain and the dumb stuff that you read as a kid, I guess. But it is amazing, and
yeah.
that's the part of writing that I really like, is that feeling of inventing as you go along. Um, and that's why I
Yeah.
like drawing. I don't like to do really tight drawings when I ink. I like to keep stuff loose, and then there's always some mistake that happens, but then there's other stuff that kind of is like, wow, that's really cool, and I wouldn't have planned it that way. It keeps stuff exciting and interesting, I guess, after so many years too.
It could be frustrating though, like when it's not happening. You know what I
Oh
mean? When
yeah,
it's
no,
like,
there's days. Yeah.
it's
Well,
not
there's
happening.
days when, after drawing my entire life, there's days where I go, the ability to draw a foot has eluded me, and I, it can take you down like a little path where you just question everything. And generally, if you have time, the best thing to do is to just leave it and go to sleep and come back to it the next day.
Yeah.
But you know, actually,
Something I do is
I
I
just
haven't
realized it's really late.
yeah, no, I don't want to keep you forever. Yeah, I really appreciate you doing this. Is there
Oh, no
anything like
problem.
you wanna promote or whatever while you're here?
Uh, I don't have anything coming out. I can't. I guess. Yeah, just on Twitter. If
Yeah, you're
anybody's
on
interested
Twitter
in,
at Jerry
if
Ordway.
anybody's interested, I'm still selling my Proton comic.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm still trying to do new stuff, but I keep getting sidetracked. But I do have a couple issues that are up on my, what do they call it? The
Like a blog
tweet that's
spot?
the
Oh, the
t
pin tweet.
Yeah, the pin tweet, except
Yeah,
now
yeah,
what is it
yeah.
called? A pin
I'm gonna
post?
get a couple because I was looking at that earlier.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did them for selling at shows and also to kind of maybe trick myself into drawing because I've been wanting to do my character for a long time and I keep stopping and starting and I would always wind up having to put it aside for other
This
deadline.
character, Proton, wasn't this this is one of your early things, right? From like the
Yeah,
early days of
yeah,
like
yeah,
zines.
yeah. I did it back in early incarnation back in 1975, 74, 75 when I was in high school and self-published. So I'm back where I started, self-publishing and making no money. uh, but yeah,
Anyways, this was like a great conversation, and I'd love to have you back on sometime in the future.
oh, cool.